First and foremost, I'm sick. I'm sorry I sound like crap. There's nothing that can be done about it. I've now put something like 20 hours worth of research into this topic, and gosh dang it, I'm going to make this video whether or not it kills me. 2, I'm not even going to make you wait till the end. The best summon necro setup, without question, is a Might Mercenary wearing Bramble armor, using Infinity for the weapon, the Necromancer themselves using Beast Runeword at the 75 FCR breakpoint, and then having an Iron Golem made out of a Pride. There you go. You don't have to sit through all the analysis. You don't have to sit through all this stuff. Everybody who said it, you're right. There you go. Absolutely. Now, for the people who actually want to learn why Pride is still a trap, Beast might also be a trap, and there is no world in this or any other hell where Fortitude is the best armor for your mercenary, why don't you stay a while and listen? Now, for people who don't know, I set out to prove just how impactful your skeleton army's DPS was, how impactful your mercenaries' DPS was, which setup between Fortitude and Bramble would net the most total damage, whether or not Beast was best in slot, whether or not using a Pride Iron Golem was even something that you should really do, and I sat down and I crunched the numbers. Now, because I respect your time and I'm not going to make you sit through everything that you don't want to do, I'm going to begin with our findings so that you can just get a very clear picture of it, and if you want to see all the nerd part of it, I have that in the rest of the video for the people like me who can't get out of Excel sheets. All of our testing was pointed at how long it takes our army to kill players 8 Diablo. I would do it with isolated skeletons, still benefiting from Might and Conviction Aura by putting those onto hero edited items in single player. I would do it with an isolated mercenary. We would account for the damage increase from Bramble, the lack of damage from Bramble, any additional damages like whether or not we're using a Fire Golem versus an Iron Golem, and then we did averages of multiple runs in a row. If there was ever a run that seemed like it was so out of left field for how long that it took, we assumed that there was a problem with that run and then would redo that run to be able to submit the best possible time over to the averages. Then we would take the expected time to kill based off of the sheet damage increases on our army and on our mercenary, and then compare that to the effective time to kill. From this testing, without getting into any of the other numbers, this is what can be said as a true statement. Bramble is absolutely the best armor to put onto an Act 2 Might Mercenary using Infinity to get the best DPS outcomes possible. You'll see that in every test were always faster using Bramble than they were with Fortitude. Even when we had both Beast and Pride available, Fortitude still underperformed using Bramble. The next interesting thing is that Beast looks really good on paper, and you'll see that Beast in both sets of trials, so both with and without Pride Iron Golem, was our best true average time yield. But what you also have to understand is that you cast roughly 100 spells when you're doing something like seal popping to summon Diablo. But looking at the difference between using Beast and using Hodo with a Pride Iron Golem, you'll notice that we don't save 4 seconds worth of time on the Diablo kill alone. So that means that if we're losing 1 frame because we're using Beast over 100 casts, that's losing us 4 seconds of farming efficiency. On the best setup possible, we actually would have gained more time over this farming session using Hodo, even though it did increase our kill speed against Diablo. But this is over average runs, and what it ignores is how often something like Infector was actually immune to either physical or fire, so it would take multiple corpse explosions to be able to clear him and his pack out, waiting for the seal pop to go into effect. Now, the other side of that is that Beast is absolutely the best option when we're talking about using revives that have crushing blow, like in situations with Ubers. There are also scenarios where Fanaticism will gain you more damage on the revives that you summon than the Thorns aura would gain you in that similar situation. But I do want to point out that Beast is only better than Hodo in the best scenarios for Beast, where Hodo is already competitive against it in the same scenario. Now let's talk about Pride. An Iron Golem with Pride does get the most benefit out of these test tube-like scenarios where we're able to control for every variable. So we're talking about a monster that has a lot of health, that has a lot of physical damage reduction, and a high % chance to block in Diablo. In this scenario where you have enough time for monsters to be attacking, the benefits from Pride ends up saving you more time than not using Pride. But in actual practice, the DPS gain from Pride on your mercenary and your skeletons is almost negligible. In our first set where we're not using Pride Golem, our best outcome was 19.15 seconds, and you'll notice that that was either equal to just about equal to, or even better than every other scenario where Pride was used, except in the example where it was Beast and Pride together. And then furthermore, there were issues with Pride that I ran into that goes even further to cement my findings and why I'm going to argue that Pride is a trap. My Iron Golem actually died to players 8 Diablo multiple times if I were not to go back to town through a town portal and heal them. Pride doesn't give any access to survivability at all, and since your Iron Golem gets targeted over your other skeletons, revives, or your mercenary, not only does Diablo swing at your Iron Golem, but also when they cast Firestorm or the Fire Nova, the Iron Golem takes a massive amount of damage. So while I was willing to pause the timer while going back to town because I wanted to get a realistic understanding of how long it would take to kill Diablo, not how long it would take for me to go back to town and heal, buy potions, etc. In test scenarios where we were using an Iron Golem, roughly a third of them I would have to pause the timer and go back to town for that very reason. The second problem was that, especially with Conviction or lowering monsters' defenses, the Iron Golem actually manages to hit quite often, and the problem with that is that Pride applies freezes target. On more than one scenario, we actually had to wait for a second body to be killed because the first one would shatter, drastically reducing our corpse explosion efficiency, and in many cases, multiple bodies would shatter in a row. Pride also would apply freezes target to Diablo, and since he can't be frozen, he would be chill. In all of these scenarios, Pride slowing down Diablo actually decreases his Thorn's returned damage. So in any scenario where we were using Bramble, the outcomes from those tests were less powerful than they could have been because Diablo was literally putting out less DPS due to being chilled. And just so that you're aware, in any one fight with Diablo, I would see him become chilled upwards of 6 times over the course of even a 15 to 20 second long fight. Your skeleton army is anywhere between 7 to 14% less efficient than they should be on paper. Now, these are even with scenarios where you telestomp and they don't try to fan out around the target at all. They all just stood in place and attacked 100% of the time. Now, what you could argue is that means that DPS calc is just not accounting for something, but I sat down and I crunched the numbers, taking their average damage, their average chance to hit, the average chance that they'll be blocked, how much physical damage reduction the monster has, their average chance of applying a critical strike, which they can actually crit 5% of the time. Your skeletons, the more enhanced damage you put on them, the less they perform according to what you expect. So you can see here where we're not using Pride Iron Golem, our skeletons were roughly 92% efficient. That means that they were doing 8% less damage per second than you would expect them to, given all of the averages that I just said. The interesting part is that once you throw on a Pride Iron Golem, they became even less efficient. So they were doing upwards of 14% less DPS than you would expect. Now, why is this? Well, it just turns out skeletons are pretty bad. They're bad vehicles for delivering damage. So while putting more damage onto them will get them more damage, how close they are to their average expected DPS goes down. You basically get less bang for your buck the more damage you put on them. And the kind of interesting thing to note here is that our mercenary actually becomes more efficient the more damage that you put on them. So while our mercenary was only on average 88% efficient without Pride Golem on, with Pride Golem on, he was upwards of 96% efficient. So he was only losing between 3 to 4% of your expected DPS outcome. And in fact, in one scenario, this was using Hodo, Fortitude Armor, and Pride, the mercenary actually exceeded expectations. I sat there and racked my brain for a long time trying to figure out how that was possible. I reran the set of tests twice over, and I continue to get this average expected outcome. So while I absolutely could have messed up something, I just think that this particular combination is outperforming sheet damage, and that's perfectly fine. On average, he is still less efficient than you would expect him to be. It's interesting to note that the more damage on him that you stack, the better he is at reaching your expectations. Okay, now for people who really want to see the data, I'm going to make this entire sheet available so that you can take it, copy it, check all my equations, do whatever you want. But outside of the factual mathematic findings that we had, I'd like to share my insights running all these tests and what I noticed. First off, when we were talking about players 1, there was almost no setup that legitimately outperformed any of the other ones while we were talking about the seal popping. Just going through players 1, Chaos Sanctuary, it really didn't matter if I had Iron Golem, if I had Beast on, if I was using Fortitude or Bramble. Either the Seal boss died because when we telestomped onto them, the entire pack of monsters all swung at them, or the Seal boss died after I cast Corpse Explosion because the entirety of your army chose to attack a minion instead of the boss. So when we're talking about players 1 efficiency and what you need to be the best in slot summon Necromancer, there was quite literally no difference in efficiency between just running Hodo and Bramble and just running Beast, Fortitude, and Pride. I legitimately believe in every scenario where you're not either talking about a massively long players 8 crushing blow relevant farming scenario or strategy, something like the Ubers, using a Beast is not better than using a Hodo. The Beast really has no impact on that, and neither does the Iron Golem. On top of that, in a lot of scenarios, the Iron Golem was also a bit of a hindrance. When we're talking about telestomping, that puts your Mercenary and the Iron Golem right on top of one another. So if there are any AoE damage effects that were going off, even though something like Diablo or other monsters were targeting the Iron Golem themselves, the Mercenary ended up getting caught in the crossfire. So while Pride is getting you better damage output in some scenarios, the Iron Golem being a problem for your Corpse Explosion efficiency, as well as being a massive asset loss in case they end up dying due to some reason, I legitimately cannot think of an argument where Pride on an Iron Golem is really good for a summon Necromancer. Now, what I have seen in comments is that people are arguing that you should be using Decrepify instead of Amplified Damage because it reduces monsters' damage as well as reduces their attack speed. And for keeping your Iron Golem alive, that's absolutely true. But remember, in every single testing scenario while using Amplified Damage, Bramble is better than Fortitude. And because Amplified Damage is stronger than Decrepify for increasing physical damage dealt to the target, you are choosing to lose efficiency on average by using Decrepify than you are gaining from the Pride Iron Golem. So by using a curse that's better for keeping an Iron Golem alive, you're losing out on greater than a 50% and upwards to 4 times damage increase against almost every single target in the game, and drastically hindering your Corpse Explosion damage output. And all of this really hinges on the point that I've been trying to make for a little bit, and I was hoping that this testing would help to show. If my skeletons are only 86% efficient according to what you expect their DPS increase to become, then that means that you're not gaining as much from the sheet damage as you are in the real game. And remember that my numbers are being generated from perfect test tube full variable control scenarios. Perfectly telestomping on, the monsters are never spreading out instead of attacking. None of them are dying during the fight, pausing in case anything would die during the fight so that it doesn't mess up, keeping maximum buffs on with Might, Fanaticism, Concentration Aura, keeping their bow and battle command up. These were perfect test tube scenarios. So if in perfect test tube scenarios, both your Mercenary and your Skeletons are outputting less DPS than you think they are, just imagine what happens when AI decisions are leading them to run around instead of attacking, if and when they get stunned by a monster, if they get chilled or slowed by a curse or by an aura. And keep in mind that a summon Necromancer is just a Corpse Explosion Necromancer with an army to help keep it and its mercenaries safe. And keep this in mind as well. On Players 1 difficulty, it really doesn't matter. Except in the scenario against Ubers where Crushing Blow is always going to reign supreme, how much damage you're able to put out from your army, including your mercenary, is almost always either overkill or not really being applied in any effective way. So in whatever scenario you think that there might be an argument for using the Pride Iron Golem, Beast needing to be better, or using Decrepify Curse, keep this in mind. When we're talking about a Necromancer that has access to Enigma, Infinity, Call to Arms, Beast, and is so rich that they can put a Pride Runeword onto an Iron Golem and not worry about whether or not it dies, you probably have the gear necessary to be able to survive any farming strategy in the game. And if that's the case, then Amplify Damage and Corpse Explosion is without question your best means by which to increase your farming efficiency. And while it's definitely cool to put a bunch of auras onto a bunch of skeletons and see them run around like Christmas trees, the math really just does not support what a lot of people without question consider to be the best in slot necessary gear for a summon Necromancer, because it's very easy to ignore all of the downsides that are harder to quantify and put onto paper. But if you're running around with a Hodo on your summon Necromancer, with the Bramble on your Act 2 Merc, reviving kind of whatever you come across, slap down an amp, slap down a Corpse Explosion, and I promise you're going to be farming with the best of them. Like I said, I'm going to include all of these data sheets in the video description. They'll be down below. I'll have that available for anybody to look at. You can go through and test it yourself. Let me know what you find if you think that there's something else here. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was another big one, another long one with a ton of data, but at this point, I think that's everything. I think that's every piece of information that really needs to be analyzed for making this type of decision and itemization on the Summon Necromancer. Again, I would love to hear from you if you find something else, or if you think any part of the calculations or the testing was either biased or incorrect. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.